I'm at Queen Street United Methodist Church in Kinston, North Carolina. Welcome to our Bible study. We're going to be covering parts of chapter 25 of Exodus and possibly getting into chapter 26. We struggled to get through half of 25 last week, but we'll see if we can cover this week. Okay, we're going to pick it up at I'd like to pick it up where we left it off at verse 22 of chapter 25. And God is telling Moses how to construct the tabernacle and especially the Ark of the Covenant. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the Ark of the Covenant this morning and its significance and what it means for us today. Okay, so he's telling Moses that there needs to be a cover over the Ark of the Covenant. And the cover is going to have two cherubim. It's going to be overlaid in gold. And the cherubim face each other with their wings touching and their faces down towards the box. And God says to Moses, "There I will meet with you, and from above the cover, from between the two cherubim that are on the Ark of the Covenant, I will tell you all that I am commanding you for the Israelites." So the Ark of the Covenant is a place of God's presence. Okay, the Ark of the Covenant is not God's presence. It is a place of God's presence. Okay. During this period in the ancient Near East, there are several forms of government. They're very limited in terms of the kind of government that you have. Some are from nations that are not well formed, and they are governed by warlords, basically tribal leaders. Other governments in that period that are more settled will have a monarch. They'll have a king of some sort. And the power of the king is going to vary depending on the nation that they govern. But generally speaking, the monarchs of those days had absolute power over their domain. Then you have these Israelites, and they're not Israelites yet, they're Hebrews. And they are led by Moses, who is not a king, and their form of government is a theocracy, which means that their form of government is that they are ruled over by God. You have human agents that assist in carrying this out, but all the directives, all of the orders, all of that comes from God through Moses to the people. Okay? So there have been several attempts down through the ages for nations to become, or colonies to become, theocracies. When the Pilgrims came over on the Mayflower, their objective was to create a theocracy here in this country. They were modeling themselves on the Hebrews that came out of the Exodus. It didn't work out too well. Okay, they eventually formed a different type of government, but certainly a better one than a monarchy. So let's say that a nation goes into battle. The thing that boosts the morale of the troops more than anything else is the presence of the monarch with them. So if the king is on the battlefield, that's a morale booster, and the king gives them a rah-rah speech and, invokes their loyalty, and, we're going to beat this other king. And basically, the battles that were taking place were more between kings than they were between nations and cultures. The Hebrews don't have a king. So their focus for morale has to be the presence of God with them. And in order for them to understand that God is with them, there has to be some object that can be identified as the place where God is. So when the Hebrews go into battle, instead of carrying standards, flags, and things like that, they're carrying this box. And this box is the place where God is. So knowing that God is on your side, gives you an advantage over a group that might be led by a king because their God is back in the temple. Okay? So basically the thing, we look at monarchs today, and we may not be enamored by their qualifications and mental acuity. And so if you have a king who is adult, their presence might be a morale booster, but then again, if the guy's working out your strategy, that might not be a good thing. Okay? But if you have God with you, you can have assurance that whatever the strategy is, that God is in charge. And God is telling the people, I'm fighting with you. So God will send angels or plagues or something. That's what God is saying to the people. The fact that you have me with you is going to assure that you will win the battles and that you will be able to take territory. Okay? And how do they know God is with them? There's the box. Okay? So God is telling Moses, instead of the mountaintop where they were meeting, God will meet with Moses wherever the box is. Okay? All right, the table for the bread of presence. You shall make a table of acacia wood, 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, and 1.5 cubits high. You shall overlay it with pure gold and make a molding of gold around it. You shall make around it a rim a handbreadth wide and a molding of gold around the rim. You shall make for it 4 rings of gold and fasten the rings to the 4 corners of the 4 legs. The rings that hold the poles used for carrying the table shall be close to the rim. You shall make the poles of acacia wood. He really likes acacia wood. And overlay them with gold, and the table shall be carried with these. You shall make its plates and dishes and flagons and bowls with which to pour drinks and drink offerings. You shall make them of pure gold. And you shall set the bread of the presence on the table before me continually. All right, what is the big deal about the bread of presence? It's kind of interesting that there isn't a lot of detail in the Old Testament about what the bread of presence is or its function, okay? But it's called the bread of presence. The bread of presence, okay, remember these, Moses and the 40 elders went up to meet God, and they saw God, and they ate and drank with God. All right? The bread of presence is a reminder that they are in the presence of God. Just like when we go and celebrate the sacrament, and we understand that God is meeting with us in sacrament, this bread of presence is a tangible, again, a tangible representation that God is eating with them. Now, the bread is going to be consumed by priests. It's reserved, okay? But it's an indication to the people that not only is God with them, the bread of presence says that God accepts them. Okay? So, it's, again, it's something that tells you that this is not a God who's off somewhere gallivanting. This is a God who is with you, who is present with you, who accepts you, and eats with you, that kind of thing. Now, there was a time later on where David and his band of thieves were on the run, and they were getting kind of desperate, and they went to where the ark and the tabernacle was, And the troops, David distributed the bread of presence to the troops, which was sacrilege. Okay? But he just felt like feeding the army was more important than whatever was going on at the table. So David was kind of in and out of respect for God. So I just want you to be aware of that. Okay. There is a lampstand. The lampstand of pure gold. The base of the shaft of the lampstand shall be made of hammered work. Its cups and calyxes and petals shall be of one piece with it. There shall be 6 branches going out of its side. The branches of the lampstand out of one side of it, and 3 branches of the lampstand out of the other side of it. 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms shall each with calyx and petals on one branch, and 3 cups shall be shaped like almond blossoms, each with calyx and petals on the other branch. So for the 6 branches going out of the lampstand, on the lampstand itself there shall be 4 cups shaped like almond blossoms, with each calyxes and petals. There shall be a calyx of one piece with it under the first. I don't know how this works. I'm trying to put this thing together in my head, and I'm not seeing it. I'm just not seeing it. Okay. You got calyxes. I don't know what a calyx is. Somebody can Google it. So for the 6 branches that go out of the lampstand, their calyxes and their branches shall be of one piece with it, the whole of one hammered gold. That's a repetition. You shall make 7 lamps for it, and the lamp shall be set up so as to give light on the space in front of it. Its snuffers and trays shall be of pure gold, and all these utensils shall be made from a talent of pure gold. And see that you make them according to the pattern for them which is being shown you on the mountain. All right.
The calyx is the outermost group of floral parts, the sepals.
Okay. All right. Very good. So it's the part below the petals, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. What about this lampstand? The lampstand also represents the presence of God. Just like on our altar, we have candles, and there is a Christ candle. And when they're lit, it's a representation. You know, it started out that the priest needed to have light so he could read the text and the sacrament, okay? But it was a dual purpose, and the other purpose was to demonstrate the presence of God. So we make a big deal about acolytes coming in, bringing the presence of God into the sanctuary, lighting the candles. It's a representation that God has come in and is present with us. Okay? This lampstand has the same function. It is very important. It is central, actually, to the celebration of Hanukkah. And after the temple was restored, after the Greeks desecrated it, they set up this lampstand in the temple, and they were supposed to have a celebration that lasted several days, and they ran out of oil. So they couldn't keep the lamps lit, but the lamps burned anyway. And that's the miracle of Hanukkah. And that's what Hanukkah celebrates, is this restoration of the temple and the realization that there's more to this lighting and the presence of God than just a candle being lit. Okay. But the lampstand is very important. It reminds them of the light that led them out of Egypt, the pillar of smoke by day and the pillar of fire by night. The lamps are used, of course, to illuminate the temple at night. Remember that Sabbath begins sundown on Friday and goes through sundown on Saturday. So your first celebration of Sabbath is going to be in a dark tent. So it's important that they have light in there. And so God is describing some very ornate lamps that are going to be used for that purpose. Okay. All right, let's get to the tent. The tabernacle itself you shall make with 10 curtains of fine twisted linen and blue, purple, and crimson yarns. You shall make them with cherubim skillfully worked into them. It's interesting because um, these are depictions of angels. Okay, you're going to find depictions of angels, but not depictions of God. The cherubim are part of the heavenly court. And so they are like high officials in God's court. The length of each curtain shall be 28 cubits, and the width of each curtain 4 cubits. All the curtains shall be of the same size. The 5 curtains shall be joined to one another, and the other 5 curtains shall be joined to one another. You shall make loops of blue on the edge of the outermost curtain in the first set, and likewise you shall make loops on the edge of the outermost curtain on the second set. You shall make 50 loops on the one curtain. You shall make 50 loops on the edge of the curtain that is in the second set. The loops shall be opposite one another. You shall make 50 clasps of gold and join the curtains to one another with the clasp so that the tabernacle may be one part. Okay, so he's telling them how.
Where did they get all this stuff?
That's
Amazon?
Yeah, right. That was Amazon. The problem is they didn't have an address.
Right,
Okay.
and they're in the middle of the desert.
They're in the middle of the desert, okay? And yeah, and they have run out of resources. They're still being fed by manna. So as I mentioned in our last session, it's just like a little country church, okay? A little country church starts out as a clapboard building, no insulation, rough benches. I remember when I was growing up, our church was an old Army chapel, a World War II Army chapel. And it was really rough, okay? It was built as fast as they could build it. And but it was built well. The design for it and the structure was solid, but it wasn't elegant by any means. Okay, and as we began to worship in that sanctuary more and more, when you have pews that are made out of 2x4s, they're not the most comfortable, and so they got to a point where they put in new pews and then cushions on the pews, and the sermons could get longer then, and it was like, we had a boiler that was, the back end of the church was our home. It was a parsonage, and if you think having a parsonage across the street from the church is bad, try having it in the church. Okay, Sunday school classes in your house. Anyway, everybody knows what you're having for dinner. It's like. The intrusion, the lack of privacy was just phenomenal. But anyway, there was a boiler in the church. It was a Army boiler, and it fed steam pipes through the piping in the ceiling. And then it went to like a big radiator in the ceiling with fans that blew the hot air down, okay? And when those pipes began to get hot, it was like somebody was hammering them. Bam, 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 So anyway, they had to do something about that too. Gradually, the church became more comfortable. The church became better attired. There were new things on the altar as people died and memorials were being made, and it developed. Okay, now you're looking at it, the description that you have for the tabernacle is probably not the tabernacle that they could afford to build when they're on the march. Okay, this is a tabernacle that could have been developed after they took the territory, they became a country, they had a monarch who could steal enough gold to make this stuff happen. And that's so. If I'm King David, and I want everybody to know that that God is on my side, and that we're working together, I'm going to take that ratty old tabernacle up in Shiloh and I'm going to fix that thing up. And we're going to have a renovation project, okay? So remember that the people who are writing this are people who were carried off into captivity. Some in the early phase of that captivity might have remembered what that tabernacle looked like when David set it up, not in Shiloh, but in Jerusalem. Okay? So the description that you're getting of this tabernacle is the late model tabernacle, more than likely, not the one that they were able to maintain on a march where they're, by the time you're eating manna and quail, you've gone through the gold. Okay? So to say that they have all these resources, and then when you talk about linen, who's going to weave that? Okay? I mean, for linen, you have to go get the reeds, and you got to pound out the reeds, and then you've got to take the fibers and spin them, and then you've got to put them on a loom. And I mean, this, and that's the cheap fabric, So this isn't something that people on the march are going to be able to develop. Okay? The people on the march are going to be able to take wool, goat hair, things like that, and make basic stuff, but they're not going to be able to do stuff like linen, not without buying it from somebody. Okay, so yeah, in my mind, this tabernacle, I'm sure that they had some kind of a movable tent that they were using for worship. And it probably had the basic design of an area for the general people, and then you also probably had a Holy of Holies in the back for the ark and for the priests. And they probably had some lighting of some sort. But to say that they had all of this lavish stuff, you don't get this lavish stuff. Nomads don't have this stuff. Nomads don't have this stuff. Okay? So, but did they ever build a tabernacle like that? Well, they certainly renovated one of them up. Okay. You shall also make curtains of goat hair for a tent over the tabernacle. You shall make 11 curtains. The length of each curtain shall be 30 cubits, and the width of each curtain 4 cubits. The 11 curtains shall be of the same size. You shall join 5 curtains by themselves and 6 curtains by themselves, and the 6th curtain you shall double over at the front of the tent. You shall make 50 loops on the edge of the curtain and the outermost, that is outermost in one set, and 50 loops on the edge of the curtain that is outermost in the second set. Okay, if you have eaten all your goats, where's the hair? I'm just saying.
The shear shop.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you shall make 50 clasps of bronze and put the clasps into the loops and join the tent together so that there may be one whole. The part that remains of the curtains of the tent shall, the half curtain that remains shall hang over the back of the tabernacle, the cubit on one side and the cubit on the other side of what remains in the length of the curtains of the tent shall hang over the sides of the tabernacle on this side and on that side to cover it. You shall make for the tent a covering of tanned ram skins. Thought we ate those. And an outer covering of fine leather. Where are all these animals if you're eating manna and quail? I know what it's like to live in tents for a while. When I was in Desert Storm, I only stayed in a building overnight for 2 nights, and that was a captured Iraqi headquarters building. The rest of the time, it was either in a hole in the ground or in a tent of some sort. And we had the thing you don't want to be in the unit, you don't want to be the pole man. Okay, the pole man is low man on the totem pole. Okay, almost literally. But he's the guy who has to crawl in under the canvas with the pole and hoist the center of the tent up while everybody else spreads it out. Okay, so it is a miserable job. Army canvas doesn't smell real good. I just wonder how bad the goat hair must have smelled. But anyway, and here are the poles. You shall make upright frames of acacia wood for the tabernacle. 10 cubits shall be the length of a frame, and a cubit and a half the width of each frame. There shall be 2 pegs in each frame to fit the frames together. You shall make these for all the frames of the tabernacle. You shall make frames for the tabernacle, 20 frames for the south side, and shall make the 40 bases of silver under the 20 frames. 2 bases under the first frame for his 2 pegs, and 2 bases. Wow, they're making fancy tent pegs. Golly, Pete. And for the second side of the temple on the north side, 20 frames, and their 40 bases of silver, 2 bases under the first frame, 2 bases under the next frame. And for the rear of the tabernacle westward, you shall make 6 frames. You shall make 2 frames for corners of the tabernacle in the rear, and you shall separate beneath it, but joined at the top at the first ring. It shall be the same with both of them. They shall form 2 corners, and so there shall be 8 frames and their bases of 15 bases, 2 bases under the first frame and 2 bases under the next frame. Oh, gosh. All right. One of the worst things that we had to endure was the fact that we had to put our tent pegs in sand. This thing must have been a nightmare in a shamal. It must have been. I remember I came back to my unit one day. I had what we call a GP small tent, and a GP small tent is it's big enough really for maybe comfortably. You could put 6 cots in there, but with all the equipment that we had, it was basically me and the sergeant and most of our stuff, and the other guys wanted to sleep in the foxhole with the cover over it, so that was okay. But I came back from one mission, and we were having a sandstorm. Okay, it was a really bad shamal, and I'll take snow any day over this. And I came back, and my sergeant, who was not a big guy, was in the tent, and he was hanging from the tent, trying to keep it from blowing away.
Oh.
Because the poles had just, the tent pegs had just flopped out because of the wind, and just trying to keep that thing together. But one good shamal would knock this thing down like that. So the thing that would probably work with a tabernacle like this is if you had it in a city and you could put it behind a wall to break the wind, okay? But generally speaking, I mean, trying to keep, just think if the sides of our church were canvas and we had sandstorms all the time, you would not necessarily think that was a holy place. Okay.
Like Jamie's church.
Yeah. Now, her church will get better, okay, over the years. But that's, All right. You shall make bars of acacia wood, 5 for the frames on one side of the tabernacle, 5 bars for the frames on the other side of the tabernacle, 5 bars for the frames of the sides of the tabernacle at the rear westward. Okay, so he's getting, this is basically just the framework for the tabernacle. And this is more than just a regular tent. This one has a structure, a full structure under it. It's not just a pole, and then the thing's stretched out and all that. There's a whole framework that goes with this. So it's really stronger than a normal tent. It's got reinforced walls. There's a curtain. You shall make a curtain of blue, purple, and crimson yarns and of fine twisted linen. It shall be made with the cherubim skillfully worked into it. You shall hang it on 4 pillars of acacia overlaid with gold, which have hooks of gold, and the rest on 4 bases of silver. You shall hang the curtain under the clasps and bring the Ark of the Covenant in there within the curtain. And the curtain shall separate for you the holy place from the most holy place. You shall put the cover on the Ark of the Covenant in the most holy place. You shall set the table outside the curtain, And the lampstand on the south side of the tabernacle opposite the table. You shall put the table on the north side. You shall make a screen for the entrance of the tent of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, of fine twisted linen embroidered with needlework. You shall make for the screen 5 pillars of acacia, overlay them with gold, with hooks of gold, and you shall cast 5 bases of bronze for them. All right, what's going on here? Okay, they are making the Holy of Holies. All right, if you go into a synagogue today, there's going to be, in what we would call the chancel, an enclave in the wall, in the very front of the synagogue, and it will have a curtain in front of it. Behind that is where they keep the Torah scrolls. Okay? Remember, the Ark of the Covenant had the Torah in it. Not the Torah, but it had the covenant in it. And so in Jewish worship, during the service they will bring the Torah out and it'll be read. So that's a very high holy thing for the rabbi to bring out the Torah and for people to hear it. When Jesus was crucified, when he died, at the time that he died, there was a curtain in the temple, and the temple was Herod's temple. It was a grand, huge thing. And the curtain that separated the nave from the Holy of Holies in the temple was a very thick curtain. It was not just linen, it was a heavy curtain. And it was rent from top to bottom, which meant that the Holy of Holy places did not contain God. Okay, it was a statement also against the rulers of the temple that you can't control your space. Okay, but it was also a statement that they could not keep God away from the people.
Nor did God want to be kept from the people after Jesus.
Yeah, if you read Solomon's speech at the dedication of the temple, he's saying, God, there's no way that I can contain you in this place, but I'm sure going to try. Okay? One of the remarkable things about churches generally, and this has to do with religious organizations in general, okay, not just Christians, but in Judaism, in Islam, in pagan religions, the institution tries to impose itself between God and the people. So that you can't approach God without going through officialdom in the church. One of the aspects of Protestantism was that there was a revolt against the authority and the power of the church to impose itself between people and God. And so, as the church has developed, that imposition weakened tremendously. And depending on the denomination, it could mean that the clergy have almost, they're not even recognized as official. In some denominations, you don't even have ordained clergy. You just have elders in the church, or something like that, but you don't have an ordained clergy.
And the Catholics, is Catholic one of the religions that they say that you have to go through the priest to get to God, because you go to confession?
Essentially, yes. The thing about that form of Christianity is that there is always some sort of intermediary if you go to confession, the priest will assign you how many prayers to say, or whatever you're supposed to do as penance. If you're going to pray, you don't pray necessarily directly to God. You pray to a saint who will intercede on your behalf. So there's this separation and this idea that God is so holy that you can't really approach God. Gotta get some coffee here. You can't approach God directly. You cannot participate in sacrament without the church's blessing for you to come forward and participate in sacrament. The thing about Methodism that's, I feel, very interesting is that as far as what is happening in sacrament other than the transubstantiation part, in terms of the presence of God, in terms of the atonement that one receives in going through the sacrament, the Methodist position on that and Wesley's position on that is very, very similar to, in terms of the effect of sacrament, the same as Catholicism. Okay? But the thing that Methodism took away was the authority of someone to say that you can participate in sacrament or you can't. So, and more than virtually any other denomination that I have seen, the Methodist Church has open sacrament for people who are not baptized. We have it for people who have not gone through confirmation. We have it for infants. If a child comes up, we offer sacrament. If a person is not a member of the church, no problem. If I go to a Catholic church, I'm not supposed to receive sacrament because I'm not Catholic, okay? But a Catholic can come to a Methodist church and no problem, come on up, okay? We don't have those issues. We don't have those issues because we understand that the invitation that God makes is not an invitation that is denominationally based. It is an invitation to anybody who wants to improve.
Why was Methodism started? Martin Luther started, he was a Catholic monk.
Yes, he was a Catholic monk.
And that's why East Germany.
We're talking about Martin Luther, by the way. Sometimes the audience can't hear what the question is. So how did Methodism start?
Well, Martin Luther started because he saw that the Catholic Church did not follow the Bible. They were doing their own rules and regulations.
Yes, and it was corrupt.
Right.
In his day, it was very
My
corrupt.
grandmother did a lot of research on all this stuff.
Yes.
So East Germany was Lutheran.
Mm-hmm.
West Germany was Catholic.
Right.
And, Catholics controlled the whole country. As
Okay.
I said before, all the teachers.
Well, let's get back to your first thing, okay? How did Methodism start? Okay.
Yeah, I never heard of a Methodist or Baptist until I come over here and I married a man and he was a Methodist.
And here you go.
And he said, "You could be a Methodist now."
Marriage has a lot to do with a person's personal theology. Okay, how did Methodism start? Okay.
Wesley?
John Wesley and his brother Charles, okay, were Anglican priests. They belonged to the Church of England. All right? England had gone through some very difficult times. They had gone through a very lengthy, very bloody, very destructive civil war. Part of the anti-monarchy were the Puritans, represented by Oliver Cromwell. And so there was still a divide. There was still a taint if you had an ancestry somewhere in the Puritan camp, which Wesley did. His father was an Anglican priest as well, but he had a Puritan heritage, okay? He was very unpopular in the parish where he was. In fact, they burned down the manse, the parsonage where he and his family resided. Wesley just barely escaped from that, but as a child. But anyway, Wesley and Charles became Anglican priests. But because of this heritage that they had, there was still a residual idea of this anti-church bureaucracy intervening between people and God concept. Also, part of the Puritan heritage was a devotion to the work of God in the community. Okay, now understand, the Anglican Church was responsible for all social programs in the community, but they were very selective about who could access them. If you were not Church of England, they might not help you. They probably wouldn't help you, no matter how destitute you got. And John Wesley felt a burden for everyone, so that they would, they wanted to reach out. They wanted the church to be more proactive socially. Okay, so they began a reform movement within the church. They were derisively called Methodists because John Wesley followed a routine for devotions, prayer, Bible classes, a Bible class called the Holy Group. That would seem to be a fairly condescending title, but in Oxford University. But he and Charles persisted in this, and so the Methodist movement began as a movement within the Anglican Church. He never wanted to be anything but an Anglican priest. He just wanted the Anglican Church to be more responsive to the community. Okay, he wanted the people to understand more about holiness and salvation. Institutionally, if you went ahead and participated in the sacraments, you were covered. You're good. Okay, so the whole idea was that you go to the church, you get the sacrament, you're good for another week. Wesley's idea was there has to be something heartfelt in this. There has to be a real sense of not only guilt but angst about your sins. Okay. He also believed that the Holy Spirit enables people to improve over their lives. So he called that sanctification. And while some offshoots of Wesleyism consider it an event, Wesley understood it as a process. So what happened was that there was an American Revolution, and Wesley recruited British soldiers to come and fight for king and country over here. Kind of got away from that do no harm thing that he espoused. But anyway, when the colonies succeeded in seceding from the British Empire, Wesley realized that there wasn't going to be an Anglican church in the colonies, in the new country, and that this Methodism amongst what became the Episcopal Church, there still needed to be a social movement. So he took it upon himself, although he was not a bishop, to ordain 2 people to come over here. Okay, Francis Asbury was one, and I think Coke was the other, and they came over here to keep the Methodist movement going. Yeah, that's where you get Cokesbury from. And what happened instead was that when they got here, the people who had been Methodist, their Methodist movement was already started here, but the people who had been Methodist decided they didn't even want to be part of the Episcopal Church at all. So they formed their own denomination, and they elected Asbury and Coke as bishops, which really made Charles upset. Okay, who gave his brother the authority to ordain somebody, and then they come over here and become bishops? Okay, but anyway, that's how Methodism began in this country, and they recruited people as lay pastors. Asbury went all over the place all over the colony, the former colonies, and started preaching in the backwoods country and everywhere. You don't have to go far to get backwoods, but Methodism took off. It really took off because a lot of the people who came into it were Church of England, and they found in Methodism a very refreshing and very American start to this process. So that's how Methodism began. Okay, but we didn't dump Anglican doctrine as they did on the mainland. They just totally dumped the idea of sacrament and everything else.
But Wesley didn't come over here to this country, right?
He did as an Anglican priest. He came to Georgia and ran afoul of the governor of Georgia because he fell in love with his daughter, and his daughter didn't fall in love with him, and he denied her communion, and it didn't go well. Okay, his brother came in also with him to be a missionary to the Indians in Georgia, and this guy from England had no concept of Native American culture and failed utterly. So they got on a boat and came back. But that's a long story. Anyway, we have gone long. We'll start chapter 26 next week, and hopefully we'll get through it. Okay, God bless you all.
What do you think?